Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga 1 in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Encounters. The moon illuminated a green-clad figure clad in homemade armor leaping over the fence. The shadow cast in the moonlight resembled a frog or toad, and pale green eyes scanned the area. So, let's have a look round this institute. Todd Polanski muttered to himself, unaware that every move he made was being tracked with newly installed sensors. Shades said they welcomed mutants. Let's see what they're like, and if there's anything worth taking. The hidden control room far below the mansion showed Todd's progress, while other screens displayed diagnostic data of him gathered by the scanners. Charles tilted his head slightly as he scanned the flowing text. Interesting, super strength, and enhanced reflexes, but primarily in the lower torso and legs. Boosted acceleration resistance, slightly increased damage resistance, a definite prospect for recruitment. Shame about his hygiene, Scott said from behind him. Storm to Professor X. A voice said over the communicator. I am almost in position. Excellent. It looks like he's entering the front door now, is that Kurt? Looks like it. Scott agreed, leaning closer to the screen. I wonder where he's headed. Whoa. Elf. Elf. Kurt repeated, shocked and insulted by the new arrival. What do you mean, elf? Blue elf. Todd yelped, pointing. Je name is Nightcrawler. Kurt growled. Who are you, and why do you think so bad? Scott shook his head. This isn't going to go well. If only Clark was here. He's currently dealing with a sinking ferry in Australia. Xavier sighed. And with Jean still out with Duncan Matthews and Martha not having any powers. Scott, you'd better head up and try to calm things down. On it. Scott said, heading for the lift. Todd slammed into the wall, barely missing his irritating opponent but dislodging a picture that dropped to the ground. Hold still so I can clobber you. What, you think I'm stupid? Kurt retorted, somersaulting over Todd's head and landing on the balcony. All I've handed was a cookie or two, but with your reek, I don't think I could stand to face any food soon. You reek worse than unwashed lederhosen. Todd growled and leapt at Kurt again, only for Kurt to drop off the balcony and leap down the hallway. Snarling with rage, Todd sprang after him, not caring how much damage he did just so long as he managed to hurt the blue-skinned elf who was taunting him. As the duo re-emerged into the hallway, Todd found himself crashing into the wall as Kurt vanished in a cloud of black, sulfurous smoke. Arg! Todd shouted, his frustration evident. That's it, I'm outta here. This place is too freaky. Kurt dropped down from the chandelier as Todd vanished out the doors, then he turned as someone walked up behind him. Scott. I'm in trouble now, J.A. No. Scott said. I don't think Todd would have fitted in, his temper's far too short. Where were you going? Kitchen. Kurt grinned. Fraulein Martha let me help her make some cookies earlier. Scott grinned in understanding. Well then, I see no problem with a late-night snack. Scott said. Let's go. Freaks. Flippin' freaks. Todd panted as he raced towards the fence. A moment later, he froze, staring first at the shadow in front of him, then up at the white-haired black-clad lady floating in the air, illuminated by the moonlight. Aw man, this isn't my day. He winked, then he turned and leapt into the underbrush. Spotting the gate, he sprinted through it and collided with what felt like a brick wall. Shaking his head to clear it, he opened his eyes and his gaze was transfixed by the trio of blades extending from the knuckles of the growling man stood before him. Logan, let him go. Logan growled, then stepped to one side. Moving lowly, so as to not antagonize him, Todd moved away from him, then turned and scampered down the road. Storm, who was that, and why did he stink so bad? That was Todd Polanski. Aurora replied, landing softly beside him. Currently homeless student at Bayville High and a mutant. Welcome back, Logan. Martha made cookies. Logan grinned as he clambered onto his bike and kicked it into life. Milk. Milk on cookies? Fraulein, you are amazing. I second that motion. Scott said with a smile. I swear, these taste better each time. You'd better have left some for me. A familiar voice growled from the kitchen door. Martha. Logan. Martha smiled. Milk and cookies. Logan accepted the proffered cookie and bit into it, ignoring Scott's gobsmacked expression. Opening his eyes, he glared at the younger man. What ya staring at, bub? Logan, you know the rules. Martha said firmly and Logan sighed. Sorry, Martha. Scott and Kurt both turned in and moved so synchronized that it couldn't have been rehearsed, their astounded gazes coming to rest on Martha, who shrugged. What? How? Logan, you, wah. Scott finally managed as Logan bit into his second cookie. Simple, kid. Logan said. The kitchen is Martha's domain, and if I don't show respect, I don't get no cookies. Scott and Kurt stared at Logan, their minds almost unable to process the information. Logan took a sip of his milk and snagged a third cookie, taking a bite and closing his eyes as he savored the taste. Welcome back, Logan. Charles said from behind them. Chuck. Logan said. Who's the elf? It's been an interesting couple of days. Charles said, accepting a cookie with a grateful nod. First, let me introduce you to our newest student. Todd Polanski. Todd tripped and sprawled on the ground, almost hyperventilating as the cold voice spoke from the shadows. Todd Polanski, you have potential. The looming figure said. As it stepped into the light, Todd's throat seemed to dry and his vocal cords refused to respond. The yellow-eyed, blue-skinned lady gave a cold smile. Yes, you have potential, Todd Polanski. I am Mystique and you shall be the first member of the Brotherhood. Come with me and I shall show you to your new home. Swallowing nervously, Todd rose to his feet and followed her. Kurt? Kurt. Vive more minutes. Kurt moaned, batting weakly at the hand shaking his shoulder. Wake up, Kurt. It's your first day of school, remember? Kurt's eyes slammed open and he almost hurled himself out of bed, only to be snagged out of the air and gently lowered to the ground. Here are some towels, go get a shower. Clark smiled. I've got a few things to pick up in town, so I'll be driving you in. School. Kurt exulted, then he froze. But, Vihad if you don't like me. You'll do fine. Clark said reassuringly. Now, I'd advise getting a shower now, then breakfast. Ah. J.A. Kurt half shouted. A Martha Kent breakfast. Gone. Clark waved his hand to help dissipate the cloud of smoke, then sighed and walked out of the room and down the corridor. Pausing briefly, he knocked on a door. J.A. No teleporting inside the mansion except for emergencies, remember? Missing Fraulein Martha's cooking is an emergency. Kurt shot back and Clark grinned. I'll let it slide this time, but next time, just run. J.A. How do I look? Clark gave Kurt a quick up and down glance. Looks good, the inducer seems to be working correctly and I see you figured out the mirror controls to get new looks. Kurt nodded and climbed into the passenger seat of the black van. As Clark started the engine, Kurt spoke. I'm scared, Clark. This is the first time. You'll be fine. Clark said reassuringly as they pulled out of the garage. You performed in the circus, yes? Think of this as just another type of performance. Another performance. Kurt repeated. Yes, I think I can do that. And you'll do it well. Clark added. Can't be worse than playing to a full tent, can it? Thank you. Kurt said softly. It's what I'm here for, remember? Clark gently teased. Calm down, I know it's a big deal for you, but it'll be easier if you don't panic. But what if my inducer? Your inducer is made from Kryptonian technology. It has 5 separate backup systems should something happen. It won't fail. As long as you refrain from teleporting, you'll be fine. Kurt nodded, his gaze fixed on the landscape passing by. If you need me, tap the watch face 4 times quickly and I'll be there as soon as I can. Clark added. Thank you. That makes me feel lots better. Kurt said gratefully. So, do you know Vihadji's school is like? Not a clue. Clark admitted, although I have memorized its maps and schematics. I'll escort you to the principal's office, then to your first class. If you want, I'll even pick you up afterwards, although Scott and Jean are more than happy to give you a lift back. Thank you. Kurt said gratefully. I appreciate it. Welcome to Bayville High School, said the dark-haired woman, a professional smile on her face as she shook Clark's hand. I am Principal Darkholm, may I assume that this is Kurt Wagner? Yes, ma'am. Clark smiled as he released her hand. I'm Clark Kent, a mentor at the Xavier Institute. I see. Darkholm said, one eyebrow slightly raised quizzically. Anyway, thank you for forwarding the test results so promptly, it made it easy to assign classes. Anything to help, ma'am. Clark smiled back, and Kurt hid a frown. Something was off. Here is your timetable, Mr. Wagner. Darkholm said, handing Kurt a folded sheet of paper. Kurt opened it and scanned the timetable, then looked up as a second piece of paper was passed to him. And here is a map of the school. Your assigned locker and its combination are on the map. Thank you again. Clark smiled. I know that you are very busy, so with your permission, I'll help Kurt put his stuff away and escort him to the first class. As you wish. Darkholm said. Mr. Wagner, I hope that you enjoy it here and that you do well in your lessons. Thank you, ma'am. Kurt managed and Darkholm nodded and walked off. Kurt watched her go, then glanced up at Clark. What is it? She's a mutant. Clark said slowly. Her heartbeat is strange. She's a mutant as hell? Kurt asked. Bayville is Jebez. Clark shrugged and scooped up the bag of books and school equipment from by his feet. Come on, Kurt. Let's get your locker filled and you to your first class. Thank you. You're welcome. Clark knocked on the door and the noise behind it dropped. A moment later, the door opened and a man looked out. Mr. Snyder? Clark asked politely. At the man's nod, Clark continued. I'm Clark Kent and this is Kurt Wagner, he's new to Bayville and according to his timetable, this is his first class. Kurt. Hello, sir. Kurt said quietly as Clark gently but firmly pushed him forwards. Snyder nodded and motioned for him to enter. Kurt nervously stepped forwards and swallowed as everyone stared at him. Class. Mr. Snyder said, this is your newest classmate, Kurt Wagner. An honor to meet you all. Kurt managed to say and the class seemed to explode with shouted greetings and questions. After a moment, Snyder held up his hand for silence. Since this is Kit's first day. I'll help, sir. A dark-skinned girl said, her hand raised. Snyder nodded. All right. Mr. Wagner, please take a seat and unpack your books. Yes, sir. Kurt managed and he made his way to the empty desk by the girl. As he sat down, she smiled at him. Welcome to Bayville. I'm Amanda Sefton. You have a really cute accent, you know. Kurt felt his cheeks heat, but he couldn't hold his smile back. Thank you. Clark grinned and retreated from the doorway, closing it quietly as he left so as to not interrupt the class any further. Are you certain? Completely. Clark said, staring out of the window. I don't think you quite understand how good my senses are, sir. I can hear the heartbeats of everyone in the institute, I can even identify them by how they sound. And Darkholm's heartbeat. She didn't have one. Clark sighed. Her entire body was undefined. I used my X-ray vision and my microscopic vision on her, she's definitely a mutant. I'm not entirely sure what her power is. Assuming of course that she is really a she. Odd that Cerebro hasn't picked her up. Xavier mused, nodding his thanks as Martha placed a cup of tea in front of him. Undefined. Almost like it wasn't entirely fixed. Clark mused. Mystique. Charles realized. Who? She's a shapeshifter, and one who has learned to shield her thoughts. Xavier said. She's allied to Magneto, although what she is doing here. Magneto knows about this place, yes. Storm asked from her chair and Xavier nodded slowly. Yes, She's a perfect infiltration specialist, but now that we know she's in Bayville, I got a set of bio readings from her," Clark said, pulling a small device out of his shirt pocket. "With your permission, I'll set the alarms to warn us if she ever sets foot into the mansion grounds. Heck, I might be able to set it up to track her, find out who she meets with." "Bio readings?" Logan asked, one brow raised, and Clark nodded. "Kryptonian medtech is very advanced." Logan froze, then lowered his bottle of beer. "Kid, we need to talk. Now." Chapter 7, Revival. The door to the room opened and two black-clad figures entered, pausing on the threshold. No pressure pads near the entrance, although there's a light web halfway down. Looks like the installers didn't do a good job, it only covers the lower half of the room. They haven't had to worry about anything happening here for decades. The shorter figure growled. "This place is so highly classified that even the president would have a hard time finding out about it. Do you think he'll join us?" The shorter figure shook his head. "He already has a cause. Or had. Once we get this done, he'll be grateful, but he'll want to return to what he sees as his duty. He'll do his best to help us, though. I'm an old friend of his, and you and him are a lot alike." The taller figure nodded, then returned his attention to the large container in the middle of the room, his blue eyes seeming to glow slightly. "Looks like the systems are well maintained. If we disconnect it, the backups will keep going for 2 hours or so. Is that enough time?" "Plenty. With the upgrades to the Blackbird, we'll be able to get him to the medbay with at least an hour to spare." The shorter figure nodded and clenched its fist, causing 3 blades to extend through its glove. "All right, Flyboy, let's do this. I have a promise to keep." The agents stood aside as a tall, eye-patch-wearing black man stormed in through the doorway and halted, glaring at the area where a container had once been. After a long, silent moment, he turned to the senior operative. "Report." "Yes, Director, the information we've collected, the installation was infiltrated by 2 meta-powered individuals, probably mutants. One of them was totally bulletproof, even an RPG failed to have an effect on him, while the second is believed to be the man once known as Weapon X." Fury glanced at the wall, where a trio of gashes indicated that something had sliced through the steel. "Yes, sir," the agent said, having followed his glance. "The spacing and number of gashes corresponds almost exactly to other damage known to have been caused by Weapon X. So, what happened?" "From the partial records that survived the assault, and interviews with the soldiers, it seems that the 2 attackers fought their way through the entire base, disabling but not injuring or killing the soldiers assigned here, except for a few bruises and 1 twisted ankle, that is. Once all the soldiers had been accounted for, they forced their way into the secure room and removed the cryogenic chamber. We have no idea where they took it. Logan's linked to the Xavier Institute, but they don't have the technology there to revive Rogers. I'd know if they did." Fury mused. Yet Logan would never do anything that would put his friend's health at risk. Something new has been added. "Sir." Logan must have made contact with someone he believes can not only revive Rogers, but stabilize his condition. Fury mused. "Not even Dr. Doom could do that, and I know that Logan hasn't gone anywhere near Tony Stark or Reed Richards. Damn it, Logan, what are you doing? Can you really bring him back? And if so, how? Are you sure that you can bring him back?" Logan asked as Clark carefully examined the readouts of the frozen man in the custom-made crystalline chamber. "Bringing him back isn't the problem. I've had the computer download, analyze, and compile every single known fact about the human body, and I ran several scans on Scott, Jean, and Aurora with their permission in order to check the accuracy of the combined data. I can even reverse the neural degradation caused by freezing process. The real problem is the process they used to enhance his body. I'm still analyzing the effects to try and find out what went wrong." "The super soldier serum." Logan nodded. "I've searched for years, as has Fury, but neither of us have been able to find out what it was. It died with its creator." Clark nodded slowly. "I see. Well, I can try to apply certain Kryptonian medical techniques that should help. I know what a baseline human body should be like, and from what you've told me, the serum enhanced him to almost off the scale for a normal human. If it fails, I'll keep him in stasis, but I believe I can revive him. According to the computer, there's better than a 90% chance of full recovery. Logan seemed to sag in relief. 90%? Hell, Steve and I used to smash through 1,000 to 1 against odds. 90%, that means he'll make it. Clark smiled and carefully didn't contradict him. Logan, we need to talk. Logan froze, then slumped. Sure, Chuck. What's up? I was hoping to ask you that. Xavier said, moving towards his office, Logan following him. Both you and Mr. Kent seem to have a project which is taking up quite a bit of your time. Normally, this would not be much of a concern to me, since anything that brings you closer to the rest of the team would undoubtedly be a good thing, but then I received a query from a certain Nick Fury, asking about someone who I do not recognize. Logan slumped into one of the chairs in front of Xavier's desk. Shouldn't known ol' Nick would have tracked me down. He's asking about Rogers, right? Steve Rogers. Xavier confirmed. He thinks that you may have brought him here, but I said I have seen no sign of him in the mansion. And he brought that? Logan asked, leaning forwards, his eyes wide with shock. Wow, I guess all that stealth stuff Flyboy installed worked. Heh, looks like S.H.I.E.L.D. don't know about our expanded basement. Although somewhat reassuring, that is not the issue here. Xavier pointed out and Logan leaned back with a smile. Flyboy and I retrieved Rogers. He's one of the few things I can remember from before my awakening 15 years ago. Me and him fought alongside each other in World War II, he was backed up by the Howling Commandos. It was before I got my metal bones, you understand. Please, tell me more. Xavier invited. Steve was the only success in the Super Soldier project. Logan said. There would have been more, but a German spy killed the scientist in charge, and he hadn't written down any notes on the formulae in an attempt to stop the Nazis stealing it. Meant that Steve was it. However, the formulae turned out to be flawed. Sure, it boosted him hugely, but his body couldn't handle it. After a year, it started breaking down. That's when they assigned the Howling Commandos to back him up. They were a tough lot, multinational, led by the youngest sergeant in the army, Fury. His second was Corporal Dum Dum Dugan, the others were Privates Cohen, Jones, Mainley, Rebel Ralston, Junior Juniper, Pinky Pinkerton, and Koenig. All brave men, each with their own specialties. I've heard of the Howling Commandos, a unit assigned to S.H.I.E.L.D. Xavier interrupted and Logan nodded. Yeah, that's the second group, the powered ones. I'm talking about the originals. I ran a few missions alongside them during the war. Eventually, me and Steve had to take part in a raid. Several of them, during the closing months of the war. With our abilities, we would hold on to a specially modified fighter and be dropped into prison camps. No parachutes. We'd attack from within while the Howling Commandos led the assault from outside. We took several camps that way. Saved hundreds of people. Including Eric. Xavier nodded. He told me, he was about to be shot, along with a dozen others, when you landed on the SS Trooper. Made quite an impression on him. Yeah. We did good work. But we found out that the Army Command was trying to create a new super soldier serum. One that was nowhere near as effective and which would instantly kill half of those who took it. So Steve and I raided the lab and destroyed all the research, but it was Steve's last battle. We knew he was dying, so we used some of the technology on the base and froze him, hoping that a cure could be found one day. Nick called in several hundred favors, had Steve transferred to the Howling Commandos HQ, and from there to a secret location. Only a dozen people ever knew where that location was, and most were assigned to keep watch, not knowing what they were guarding. And when you found out about the medical technology Clark had brought from Krypton, you thought it could be used to bring him back. Pretty much, yeah. Logan nodded. Steve's a real patriot, but he's no bigot. He knew about my healing factor and bone claws, yet he accepted me. He won't join our team, but having him back will mean that your dream is a step closer. He's a paragon, like Flyboy. The world needs him, Chuck. Trust me. For several moments, both men were silent, then Xavier nodded. Very well, Logan. I'll run interference for you on this. How long will you need? Before Logan could answer, his communicator beeped and Clark's triumphant voice sounded. Logan, he's waking up. The blond man groaned and slowly opened his eyes, fighting to adjust to the clear yet dim light that nevertheless seemed too bright. For a moment, all he could see was shapeless color and blurred movement, then the world seemed to resolve and he found himself looking up into eyes bluer than his own. Good morning, you've been asleep for quite some time. Do you remember who you are? Rogers, Stephen. Captain, U.S. Army, serial number. All right. The other man interrupted, smiling. You know who you are, excellent. Welcome back, Captain Rogers. I am Kal, known as Superman, and I read about your exploits as a child. You were my hero growing up and I am honored to have been one of the two who helped revive you. Perhaps you know this man. Steve rolled his head and his eyes widened as an unshaven, smiling face appeared. Hey, bub. How ya feeling? Logan. Welcome back, bub. Logan smirked. I kept my promise, you're fixed right up. But, how? Can't tell ya, Fury will want to know, and it's secret. Logan said. Fury's still around, that emergency transfusion you gave him just before our last mission slowed his aging. Didn't do a thing for his eye, though. He'll be happy you're back. He's got your shield. As for where we are, we're in the Fortress of Solitude. Clark said, causing Steve to turn to look at him again. It's very well hidden, you can search all of Antarctica and you won't be able to find it. For now, we need to check that you're back to full fitness, then we'll take you to Washington. Logan tells me that you're likely to re-enlist. Fury's still alive. Yeah, and he's just as patriotic as you are. Logan smirked. Runs SHIELD, don't ask me what it stands for. Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division. Clark interjected, earning a glare from Logan. What Flyboy said? I'm sure he'll find a role for you there, he's tried to recruit me several times for something called the Avengers Initiative. I think you'll do brilliantly in it. This is quite a bit to take in. Steve said slowly. Well, I got your outfit ready, had to get it repaired, but it's good to wear. Logan said, pulling up a duffel bag and dropping it just beside Steve. So, you get up, washed and dressed, then we get on the plane and I tell you what you missed while Flyboy takes us to Washington. I'll send a message to Fury and he'll meet us there. I'll prep the plane and leave you two old-timers to moan. Clark joked as he left. Steve stared at him, then turned his gaze to Logan, who was shaking his head. Damn brat's invincible. Can't even stab him successfully, and the bloody kid knows it. So, while you're getting your togs on, what did you wanna know? The entire city of Washington seemed to grind to a halt as the aircraft rippled into view, swooping low as it curved round, lowering itself into a perfect landing just in front of the Washington Monument, its wings raising as it descended to allow the landing gear to touch the ground. Sir, radar can't get a lock on that thing. One of the agents surrounding Fury reported. It's as if it's invisible. No radar signature, optical cloaking better than that of the helicarrier, and reduced thermal signature. Whatever that plane is, it's far beyond anything the U.S. Air Force have. It looks like it's a highly modified State Route 77 with different wings and an extra engine. I'd heard one existed, but couldn't find out who owned it. Fury said almost calmly as a ramp opened. A moment later, his breath caught as a heartbreakingly familiar figure descended, clad in a blue bodysuit with red boots and gloves, with red and white vertical stripes around his torso. Cap. Nick? That you? Ignoring his agents, Nick Fury walked forwards, his pace increasing until both men almost slammed into each other, grabbing and hugging each other before stepping back. Fury's vision swam as his eye filled with tears. Cap. How? Logan, that crazy Canadian. Steve grinned, glancing back at the plane which had retracted its ramp and was ascending, rippling out of visibility as it did so. He called in quite a few favors, Nick, bringing me back. Him and his friend, Superman. Fury stared at him. You've met Superman. I guess I'm due a full debriefing. Steve chuckled. I was told by Logan to tell you that he's found his replacement for your planned team. Fury laughed. Damn, Canuck sure did. Your shield is at headquarters. What say we go and get it for you? Sounds like a plan to me. Steve smiled. That's one heck of a tale. Fury said, sipping at his coffee. Steve nodded. Yep, I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't lived through it. My medical file is there, and Steve nodded at the folder that he'd placed on the desk at the start of the debriefing, and from what I've been told, I'm back to peak condition, and this time, I'm not going to keel over. We'll have to run some tests, Fury said, but may I be the first to say welcome back, and welcome to the Avenger Initiative. It's good to be back, sir. Rogers smiled. It's good to be back. Chapter 8, Phased. And with the return of one of America's greatest heroes, back from the dead, the whole world waits in wonder. Who is this Superman who has resurrected the embodiment of the American ideal? I knew he was real. Catherine Pride squealed, staring at the TV and missing the amused looks that her parents were giving each other. I just knew that Superman was real. Yes, dear. Her father smiled. He is. Now I think you need to go to bed, Kitty, you have school tomorrow, remember? Kitty sighed and nodded reluctantly. Okay, Dad. Good night. Her parents smiled as she ran up the stairs. Kitty turned over in her bed. In her dreams, she was flying in Superman's strong arms, his crimson cape tracing a trail through the air as they rose through the clouds, then his face twisted in pain and he vanished and Kitty was falling, falling. Kitty hit the floor with a scream and an instant later she heard her parents running down the stairs. Wait, down the stairs. Kitty, are you all right? What are you doing down here? Kitty shivered as her father scooped her up into a reassuring hug. I dreamed I was falling. Alexander, I don't think it was a dream. Her mother whispered from the doorway. Both Kitty and Alex followed her gaze up to the ceiling. Where the blanket Kitty had been sleeping under was dangling, embedded in the ceiling as if it had somehow dropped halfway through before getting stuck. Dad. Kitty whimpered. I'm scared. What's happening to me? Clark. I have a mission, if you don't mind. Xavier said. Clark looked up from his breakfast, then his hand moved and grabbed Kit's wrist before he could relieve him of his pancakes. Kurt Wagner, sit back down. Martha half scolded. All you needed to do was just ask. Kurt grinned as Martha set another stack of pancakes in front of him. Thanks, Fraulein Martha. Anyway. Xavier resumed, ignoring the byplay. Last night Cerebro tracked 2 new mutant signatures in Northbrook, Illinois. One of them is a mid-teen male with seismic induction capabilities, the other a slightly younger female, about Kit's age, with intangibility capabilities. I was hoping you'd head out there and talk to them. Jean and I will follow in the Blackbird after lunch since she has no lessons this afternoon. Not a problem, Professor. Clark said, glancing across the table with amusement as Kurt turned pleading eyes to Martha, who smiled and refilled his plate again. I assume Cerebro is keeping track of their biosignatures. Of course. Xavier smiled. Something that would have been impossible before you joined us. Clark nodded, then his expression changed slightly. Professor, I was hoping that I could talk to you about something that I was hoping to do regarding the fortress. Fortress? Kurt asked, his ears twitching. Vhat Fortress. Well, since you've already lasted a full week and decided to stay, I think it's time you got the full tour and a bit more information. Clark grinned. You've already been in part of it, the top layer which contains the hangar bay, the danger room, the medical wing, but there's a great deal more that you have yet to see. Finish up and we'll take the main lift down. Kitty reached into her locker, trying hard not to think about what had happened that morning. As she reached for the books she needed for the next period, she heard an evil laugh, then she was shoved forwards and the locker door slammed behind her, the dial spun to lock it. Let me out. She shouted, banging on the locker door. Only if you beg, came a familiar voice and Kitty almost burst into tears. Once again, the alpha bitches of the school had decided to pick on her, but she had never done anything to them. Refusing to give in, Kitty threw herself against the locker door as hard as she could, getting a bruised shoulder. "Please, someone, help!" she cried, then a voice she didn't recognize spoke. "I'll get you out." "What's the combination?" Kitty rattled off the number and she heard the lock click, then it opened and Kitty gaped at the tall, blue-eyed black-haired man smiling at her. "Clark Kent, teacher at the Xavier Institute for the Gifted." He smiled, offering his hand to her. "Catherine Pride." Kitty mumbled and Clark smiled, then glanced at something that he was holding in his hand before looking to his right. Kitty craned to see round the locker door and saw the resident bad boy and troublemaker standing still, eyes wide and a spray can in his hand. "Lance." "Kitty. Well, this is very convenient." Clark smiled, pocketing the odd device. "Clark Kent, teacher at the Xavier Institute for the Gifted, as I told Miss Pride here." "Lance Alvarez." Lance muttered, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Clark nodded. "An honor to meet you both. You may not believe this, but I have an offer for you both, given that you both have recently demonstrated some unusual talents." Kitty froze. "You mean last night for you?" "Yes." Clark confirmed in a reassuring voice. "Yesterday morning for Lance. And before you panic, look at my feet." Bemused, Kitty looked down and gasped. Clark was floating a full 10 centimeters above the ground. A moment later, he settled back onto the floor. "As you can see, I have special skills as well," he said. "And I have friends who can help you with yours." "Hell, no." Lance snarled. "I'm good already, I don't need no floating freak telling me what to do." Clark watched him storm off, then he turned to Kitty. "I know how scary it is when you discover that you're different, that you have a power or ability that defies understanding," he said gently. "Professor Xavier himself will be coming by this afternoon if you wish to talk to him about getting help in learning to control your power. He is hoping to discuss it with your parents, if that's all right with you." Kitty nodded and looked down at the card that Clark had placed in her hand. "If you need someone to talk to, or help of any sort, I can always be reached on that number. Now, may I escort you to your class?" Kitty nodded and grabbed her books. Closing her locker, she turned and started to run down the corridor, only to stop as Clark placed his hand on her shoulder. "What? Which classroom is it?" 306, why? Eep. Clark scooped her up into his arms and Kitty's eyes widened as Clark flew down the corridors into the main entrance hall. Angling his flight path, they shot up through the hall to the third floor and down the corridor to Kitty's classroom, where Clark touched down as lightly as a professional dancer. Putting her down, he knocked on the door and opened it in response to the teacher's rough yes. "Miss Pride was delayed by some sophomores, so I escorted her here to ensure she missed as little of the lesson as possible," Clark said with a disarming smile even as he gently ushered Kitty into the room. "I apologize for interrupting your class and wish you all a good day." Kitty watched as Clark nodded to her and left, closing the door behind him, then she looked round to see most of the girls, and even a couple of boys, looking starstruck. "Wow!" one of the girls breathed. "Who was that dreamy hunk? How did you find him? And why would he hang around you?" another girl asked spitefully. "Mr. Kent?" Kitty asked rhetorically, her decision crystallizing in that instant. "Well, he's going to be one of my new teachers. I've been offered a place at the Xavier Institute for the Gifted." The entire class seemed to stop breathing and Kitty hid her smirk of triumph as she walked to her seat. Lance stormed down the corridors, his spray can forgotten in his hand. How dare that intruder stop his fun, and how did he know about his new power? Who was that flying? Lance's thoughts came to a stop as he stormed round the corner and almost collided with the very man in question. "What do you want?" he snarled. "Just to talk, Mr. Alvarez." Clark responded neutrally. "You've recently gained an interesting power. I would like to offer you training in how to use it, maybe even a chance to learn how to help others with it." "Why?" Lance scoffed. "No one helped me, why should I help them? This power I've got, it's mine to use as I want." Clark gave him a disappointed look, then held out a card. "Take this. If you decide you want help, call the number." Lance looked at the card, then dropped it on the floor. Forget it. I'm not joining any goody-goodies. I have power. And I can offer you more. Another voice purred from behind him. Lance turned round and his eyes widened at the sight of the red-haired blue-skinned woman leaning against the wall. I am Mystique, and I can offer you a chance to use that new power of yours. She said. I can offer you a new home and a position of power on a new team. A winning team. Lance stared at her, then looked at Clark. And I suppose you're going to tell me to join your team? Clark sighed. No. You are always welcome at the Institute, but I will not try to pressure you in any way. However, that being said, I urge you to think carefully about this. A war is coming. Mystique said. You are a mutant, like me, like Kent. But while his sort are appeasers and traitors to mutant kind, we know the truth. The mundanes will never accept us mutants, will try to destroy us, so we need to be able to defend ourselves against the ignorant masses. The Brotherhood awaits you, if you wish power. Lance sneered at Clark. Hell yeah. See you round, flight boy. See you in Bayville, Mr. Alvarez. Clark replied and Mystique stared at him, eyes wide with shock. How? Clark smiled and walked away, leaving a confused mutant and a very, very worried one behind. He knows. Mystique snapped, her fingers clenching the wheel of her car. Calm yourself, Raven. Magneto's voice said from the phone mounted on the dashboard. You announced yourself as Mystique and we both know that Charles suspects that I sent you to spy on him and his pathetic institute. It was undoubtedly a lucky guess. Probably. Mystique admitted after a moment. But he worries me. I've never encountered him before. Who is he? His name is Clark Kent, and he can fly. Lance said from the passenger seat. I saw him hovering, it was how he proved he was a mutant. A flight-capable mutant. Interesting. Magneto mused. Take no action against him at this time, but continue to gather information. I am sending Sabretooth to provide backup if you need it. Kitty's probably decided to join him. Lance mused. Would be the second mutant whose powers activated, would it? What information do you have? Catherine Pride, also known as Kitty. 14. Dark hair. I don't know what her powers are. Lance said almost instantly. Interesting. Please write down everything you remember about her, even the smallest detail will help. I will have one of my assistants do some research as well. You have done well, Raven. Lance, have you chosen your true name, one which reflects who you are and what you can do? Lance grinned. I shake things up and smash things down. I think Avalanche is a great name. Avalanche it is, then. Welcome to the future, Avalanche. You have joined the winning side. I know. Lance smirked, looking at the envelope of money that Mystique had handed to him so that he could get new clothes. I know. Mom, Dad, I'm home. Kitty. How was school? It was great, Mom. Hey, this is Clark Kent, he's a mutant like me, but he can fly. We talked during lunch and on the way back. Your daughter has told me about both of you, Mrs. Pride. Clark said, pausing to shake her hand. You must be very proud of having such an intelligent daughter. Call me Rebecca. Please, come in. Thank you. Clark said. As I told Kitty, my name is Clark Kent and I'm an instructor at the Xavier Institute for the Gifted, a school for those with special powers. Kitty possesses the ability to phase through solid objects. At the Institute, we can help her learn how to control her power to avoid falling through beds and floors. At that, Kitty blushed, as well as exploring how to use it in a positive way, for herself and those she chooses to help with it. Interesting. Alexander said as he entered the room. Clark promptly rose and offered his hand. So, what's your power? He can fly. Kitty exclaimed. He picked me up and flew me back, it was awesome. I have several other abilities as well. Clark said with a smile. For one, I am completely immune to telepathy and we believe that other powers might not affect me. Kitty frowned and placed her hand on his arm, then pushed. A moment later, she stepped back, looking confused. That felt tingly. Hang on. As her family and Clark watched, Kitty pushed her arm through a chair, then returned to Clark and pushed against his arm, again failing to do anything. "I can't phase through you," she said in a confused tone. "I guess you're immune to my powers too." "Probably." Clark shrugged. "It does mean, though, that if you lose control and start falling, I can hold you up until you regain control." Alexander sank onto the couch beside his wife. "Mr. Kent, apart from using powers, what will Kitty learn if she goes to this institute?" "Most of the students attend Bayville High as well," Clark replied. "At the institute, we teach students how to use their powers ethically and morally. We emphasize protecting others and refraining from violence whenever possible. We also help our students to pursue further education and, excuse me for a moment." Clark pulled out the oddly crystalline device that Kitty had spotted earlier, then nodded. "Professor Xavier has just arrived. With your permission, I'll let him explain about the institute." "Of course," Alexander said. "Wow." Kitty's exhalation of breath caught Clark's attention and he smiled as they looked at the lean shape of the blackbird in front of them. "This is how we are getting to Bayville." Clark smiled. "The SR-77 Enhanced Blackbird. Now, did you have everything you wanted to pack?" Kitty nodded, then her already wide eyes seemed to bulge even more as Clark walked past her, carrying her heavy suitcases as if they were empty. "How?" "Multiple powers." Clark smiled as he paused at the bottom of the ramp. "Super strength." "You coming?" Kitty nodded and pausing only to give her parents a farewell hug, sprinted forwards towards her new future. Chapter 9, Introductions. Clark. "And you must be Kitty. Welcome to Xavier's." Kitty smiled at the older woman as they entered the kitchen and accepted a proffered cookie. Biting into it, her eyes widened in pleasure. "Oh, wow. These are brilliant." "Martha's known for her cooking skills," a dark-skinned woman said, taking a cookie for herself. "Aurora Monroe, also known as Storm. I'm one of the tutors here and if you ever need any help of a feminine nature, Martha or I are the ones to go to." "I'm giving her the tour of the mansion," Clark said. "I thought that after the journey, a couple of cookies would be just the thing." Kitty nodded as she finished her first cookie and took a second one. "Anyway, Kitty, this is my mother, Martha Kent. She isn't a mutant, but is probably the best cook in the world. Mom, this is Catherine Pride, currently our newest student. And cookie addict, it would seem." Kitty paused just long enough to stick her tongue out at Clark before taking another cookie from the plate. Martha chuckled. "So, once Kitty finishes raiding the plate, I'll get back to the tour. Do I email cookies?" Kitty gasped as a blue blur leaped past her and grabbed a pair of cookies from the plate, quickly eating one before planting a kiss on Martha's cheek. "Fraulein Martha, Z's are amazing as always. I don't care what you claim, your power is perfect cooking." "Flatterer," Martha teased. "Oh, Kitty, this is Kurt Wagner, another student here." "Kurt, this is Kitty." "Guten Morgen," Kurt said with a bow, taking advantage of the movement to grab a third cookie. Kitty relaxed a bit as she heard Clark chuckling. "Sorry, he gets a bit intense about Mom's cooking." "Because it is perfect," Kurt interjected and Martha smiled at him as she handed a glass of milk to him, then one to Kitty. Kurt took a sip, then pouted as Martha took the plate of cookies away from him. "Fraulein. You know the rules, Kurt," she scolded affectionately. "It's lunch in an hour and a half, so no more cookies or you'll ruin your appetite." "Yes, Fraulein Martha." Kurt sighed, managing to sound depressed while grinning broadly. "Well, finish up, and we'll continue the tour," Clark said and Kitty took another sip of her milk, relishing how it seemed to amplify the flavoring of the cookie whilst trying to ignore Clark's chuckling. Kitty flopped full length onto her bed and sighed in repletion. Tea had been just as perfect as lunch and if she didn't want to end up becoming spherical, she probably needed to take up some sort of exercise. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knocking on her door and she turned her head. "Yes. It's Aurora, may I enter?" "Sure," Kitty replied as she pulled herself up into a sitting position. A moment later, the door opened and the white-haired dark-skinned lady entered and glanced round. I see you're settling in nicely, Ororo said, and Kitty nodded. Yeah, this place is amazing. And the internet connection, I ran a test and it's capable of going faster than my computer can actually upload. I mean, wow. You can thank Clark for that, Ororo said. He has access to some very cutting-edge technology. That reminds me, Kitty said. You're Callstorm, Scott is Cyclops, Jean is Miss Marvel, although she prefers not to be called that, Logan is Wolverine, Kurt is Nightcrawler, but what's Clark's name? Both Clark and Xavier looked up from their chess game as the echo of the yell died away. I thought that you'd installed soundproofing in the students' dorms, Xavier asked. Clark shrugged. I think that Kitty's door must be open. Exchanging amused glances, they turned back to their game, with Clark moving his knight to put Charles's white king in check. Ororo slowly removed her hands from her ears as Kitty hid her face in the pillow. After a moment, she tapped the younger girl on the shoulder. Are you, all right? Oh God! Kitty moaned. I can't believe I just did that. It was quite an impressive yell, Ororo admitted, rubbing at her still ringing ear. Please tell me he didn't hear that, Kitty begged, and Ororo shook her head. He's got super hearing and the door was open. I think he heard. Kitty moaned and tried to push her face further into the pillow. Ororo bit back her laughter and carefully pulled at the pillow until she could see Kitty's face. It's all right, Kitty. He's used to it. Just remember, he's still Clark. Kitty nodded, then buried her blushing face into her hands. Oh, this is so embarrassing. It's all right, Kitty, Ororo said reassuringly, stroking Kitty's back as she did so. It just came as a shock, it's all right. Kitty, wake up. Kitty slowly opened her eyes and focused on the redhead smiling down at her. Jean. You need to have a shower and get dressed, Jean said, pulling the duvet out from Kitty's grasp. Now come on, it's almost breakfast. 5 more minutes. Jean shook her head and Kitty gasped as she found herself floating in the air. So, getting up. Okay, I'm awake. Kitty yelped and Jean smiled as she lowered her. Kitty glared at her. I can't believe you did that to me. Oh, I got the professor's permission first. Jean grinned. Now, get moving. Slave driver. Kitty muttered as she accepted the towels and trudged out of the room. Mr. Kent. Principal Darkholm. As I informed you over the phone yesterday, I have another student here to enroll in this safe institution of learning. Kitty watched curiously. Whatever was going on was obviously important. Principal Darkholm was almost icily polite and Kitty couldn't help but think that it revolved around her somehow, but Clark was on edge. She could see the tension in his stance. If Darkholm did anything, she had no doubt that Clark would have grabbed her and flown her back to the institute before she even had a chance to blink. Very well, here is her timetable and locker assignment, Darkholm said, handing over 2 pieces of paper. Clark smiled thinly. Thank you. I'm certain that she'll soon adapt to the mystique of this place. Kitty. Ignoring Darkholm's suddenly frozen expression, Clark led Kitty out of the office. He knows. He definitely knows. Darkholm snarled into her phone. He gave me a warning to leave Xavier's brats alone. This is indeed disturbing, Magneto said slowly. Do you have any idea how he knew? You are, after all, virtually immune to telepathy because of your power. Not a clue. Mystique snarled. But he knows I'm a shapeshifter and he can identify me. We may need to rethink the infiltration mission. I agree, Magneto said. Has Sabretooth reported to you yet? No. Mystique growled. He hasn't. Then I shall contact him and ask what the delay is. With a roar, Victor Creed, who preferred being called Sabretooth, threw the girder at Logan, forcing him to roll out of the way. Damn it, Creed. Logan snarled. All I wanted was a quiet bike ride, and you decide to show up and attack. What happened this time? I saw you and wanted to play. Sabretooth snarled. Come out, little man, come out and fight. Emerging from hiding, Logan slashed at Creed with his claws, barely cutting his skin but ripping through his coat. Victor snarled. Do you know how long it took to find a coat that fitted? You are dead meat, I'll rip you open and feast on your carcass. Even as he spoke, Victor grabbed another girder and swung it like a bat, catching Logan in his midsection and sending him off the top of the incomplete building. Ha! He gloated, walking to the edge and peering over. I'm coming to, where did you go IARG? Wolverine pulled his claws out from Victor's back and slashed at Victor's knee, missing by a fraction of an inch. Victor, his wounds already healing, raked his talons across Logan's face, sending him backwards. I must ask you to stop. A new voice said, and Victor slowly turned to see a blue-clad figure standing in midair behind him. Those girders you're throwing could have hurt someone. Logan, it's almost tea time and we have a new student to introduce you to. Do you want me to deal with the trash? Logan shrugged. Depends. What did Martha make for pudding? Her patented chocolate cake. With pouring sauce. Enough for multiple helpings. Logan's eyes widened. Flyboy, take over. I need to get back now. Victor stared in total confusion as Logan hurled himself off the edge of the roof, using his claws to slow his descent. What just happened? He asked as Logan kicked his motorbike into life below. Seriously? What the hell just happened? We have the best cook in the world. The blue figure shrugged. You would be Sabretooth. I don't care who you are, you interrupted, and you're dead meat. Even as he finished his sentence, Creed threw his hardest punch at the man who had robbed him of an enjoyable fight with his old adversary. His fist accelerated straight towards the man's cheekbone and crack. Pain lanced up Victor's arm as he cradled his shattered hand. How? How did? The advancing figure advanced. I see you have a healing factor like Wolverine's. That means I can do this. Superman's hands flashed out and grabbed Creed's collar, then Creed found himself being dragged into the air at a speed that almost caused him to black out, eventually coming to a stop high above the ground and obviously a long way from Bayville. Below them was a mountain and Creed stared at it with horrified realization. You wouldn't. I have chocolate cake to get back to. Superman said calmly. Goodbye. Before he could respond, Creed found himself falling towards the snow-covered slopes and cliffs below. Sabretooth. Respond. Aching and battered, Creed pulled himself clear of the avalanche that his impact had triggered and rolled onto his back. Sabretooth, where are you? With a grunt of pain, Sabretooth managed to pull the custom-made phone from his belt and lifted it to his head. Sabretooth. Cut your yapping, Magneto. Creed growled. I'm here, and I'm not happy. Why the hell didn't you warn me about that bloody ringer? The long silence that followed was an eloquent example of confusion. Sabretooth, what are you doing in Alaska? And what ringer? Enjoying the view. Sabretooth snarked. Alaska, huh? Explains the snow. As for the ringer, that flying bastard in blue. Great big honking red S on his chest, red cloak. Bastard's tough, at least Colossus reacts slightly when you hit him. Red S. Yeah, kinda hard to miss. Red S in a yellow diamond, all on outlined in red. Has Xavier's X on his belt. Has the S in yellow on the back of his cloak, saw that as he was flying off, having dumped me here. Who the hell is he? There was a long silence. Eric. This is very worrying. If I'm right, my old friend may have just gained a very powerful trump card. This requires thought. Damn it, Eric. Who the hell was he? I need to get revenge. Superman. Creed felt his insides congeal. Eric, tell me you're kidding me. No. You survived against Superman. It is obvious that brute strength will not be enough against him. Sabretooth, I have a new assignment for you. I have been keeping track of a mutant whose power is to take that of others, or it will be once it activates. Meet up with Mystique in New Orleans and help her to secure the mutant. We want her loyal, so trickery will be required, which is why Mystique will be in charge. I will instruct her personally. It'll take a while to get there. Creed moaned. I'm at the other end of the bleeding country. I will make arrangements. The phone went dead and Victor stared at the twinkling stars. Superman. I went up against Superman. Ugh. Chapter 10, Rogue Recruit. Clark, a situation has just developed. Go ahead. Clark said almost absently as he adjusted his course to keep the plane level during its approach to the runway. Cerebro has just detected a new mutant in New Orleans a few minutes ago. A teenage girl with a powerful and unusual power. She can apparently drain the power of other mutants. Interesting. Clark said. That's quite some power. Yes, but Mystique was detected in the locality, as was Sabretooth. Clark bit down a curse. Are they working together? They're both known to work for Magneto. Xavier confirmed. Best guess, they're going to make this new mutant think that the X-Men are after her, and that Sabretooth is her protector. If they do that... Shit. Clark cursed. Let me land this plane, and I'll get over there. I may need backup. Cyclops and I already preparing, as are the others. If Magneto gets his hands on this mutant. I don't know if this power will affect you, but if Magneto thinks it will, he won't stop until he gets this new mutant. Hopefully it only works on humans. Clark said, frowning as he adjusted course slightly to keep the plane stable during its final approach. Hold on, okay, plane's landed. Have you uploaded the tracking data? Good, I'm on my way. Anna Marie ran through the dark night, her mind awash with panic and confusion. She had panicked when she had kissed Cody and felt his memories flowing into her, leaving him on the ground, unconscious, and her trying hard not to let his memories overwhelm hers. As she had tried to run off, several more boys had tried to grab her, and every time they did, she absorbed their memories and sent them crashing to the ground. And after that, several people had started to chase her, including a short, bulky man with silver claws and another with a weird visor. And all of them were closing in on her, she could hear them. Then the man with the blades stepped out in front of her. You may as well stop running, darlin'. He sneered. The professor wants you. The girl is free to make her own choice. Another voice snarled, and one of the largest people Anna had ever seen landed in front of her, squaring off against the intruder, his clawed fingers flexing as he moved between her and the man with the blades. Anna stared at him, her panic starting to change to gratitude that someone was trying to help her. I actually agree with Sabretooth on this one, Mystique. A third voice said, and everyone looked up in shock. But really, pretending to be Logan? Be reasonable. Anyone would think you were trying to trick the girl. What? Anna managed, staring up at the man that she recognized as the semi-mythical Superman. Simple, the two you see before you are Sabretooth and Mystique, a shapeshifter, both of whom work for a man named Magneto. She can copy their shapes, but not their powers. That's where you come in. Sabretooth backed away, growling as Superman landed. Anna looked at them, her terror ebbing as rationality re-emerged. A shapeshifter. Superman nodded and Sabretooth lunged forwards. Shut up. Anna tried to dodge out of the way, but tripped and fell. Grabbing onto something for support, she felt a new wave of memories flowing through her in the split second before she was knocked over, into another set of arms that held her gently. Oh God! She gasped. It's true, they only wanted me for my powers. They wanted to use me against you. Anna trailed off as she realized that Superman was holding her, that her hands were clasped over his, and nothing was happening. Nothing at all. Superman loosened his supporting grip and let her stand by herself. Moving as if in a dream, she lightly brushed his face, then placed her hand firmly against his cheek. How? Surprisingly, it was not Anna who had asked, but the now blue-skinned woman who had been impersonating the man with the blades. I'm unique. Superman said, smiling down at Anna. I may currently be the only person you can touch without hurting them, but whenever you need a hug, a shoulder to cry on, or even someone to carry you when you are tired, I'll be there whenever you ask. I'll never hurt you, I promise. Anna blinked as her eyes filled with tears. Whatever had happened had robbed her of the ability to touch another, then Superman. Reaching up, she grabbed him and pulled his head down, kissing him deeply. After a moment, she released him and sighed, resting her forehead against his chest. Damn. No fireworks. Sorry. Not ya fault. Anna said with another sigh. I suppose if I can't have ya as a boyfriend, then at least Avi got a friend I won't kill by accident. Superman smiled at her, then looked round. Anna looked round as well, frowning. Where'd those two go? I think they realized that their plans for you wouldn't work. He said. I can hear my friends approaching. Do you wish to meet them, or shall I take you back to your home? I am an orphan. Anna said. A rogue, Avi got no real home. Then, rogue, may I offer you a new one? Superman smiled. One with good company, excellent food and, for now at least, your own room. Outlaw that. Rogue said quietly, then her stomach growled. Oh God. I think you'll need some of that food I promised. Superman said, scooping her up bridal style and floating upwards. I think there's some chocolate cake on the menu. Report. We lost her. Xavier's people got her. That is not acceptable, Raven. Magneto almost spat. That girl is our only weapon against Superman. A weapon that doesn't work. Sabretooth interjected. Girl was stroking his face and gave him a kiss. No effect. No effect at all. For almost a minute, the phone remained silent. Eric? You still alive? Yes, yes I am. So Superman is immune to her draining powers. Yeah, but I'm not. After that flying Boy Scout appeared, he blew the plot to pieces and the girl grabbed some of my memories, saw what we were trying to pull on her. Mystique was wearing Logan's form, even I couldn't tell the damned difference, but he did. I can't disguise myself from him, Eric. Mystique said, her voice shaking. No matter what form I wear, no matter the shape, he knows it's me, and I don't even know how. Return to Bayville, we'll need reinforcements. I'll arrange for Pietro to join you. If we cannot beat him in power, speed may yet work. Xavier will probably arrange for the girl to join the local school like she did with Wagner and Pride, so make sure she gets in without any trouble. Do not try to approach her at this time. While this is a setback, it is not a disaster. At least now we know another thing about this Superman, his power is indeed different from a normal mutant. Sabretooth, write up the mission and return to my side. The phone went dead and Mystique and Sabretooth looked at each other. I don't think he liked that. At least you get to stay away from Superman. Mystique snapped. He knows who I am, if he comes after me. Then don't give him a reason to. Sabretooth shrugged. He coulda killed me last time we met. I hit him so hard my fist shattered and he didn't even twitch. Hell, he probably could have killed us both now, but he didn't. Probably hates killing, so work with that, though. Sabretooth trailed off and Mystique looked at him. What? It's just, couldn't be. Victor. Fine. Sabretooth snapped. He didn't smell human. Not human, not mutant, he smelled of something, other. Never smelled anything like it before, not a clue what it means. As Sabretooth stormed off, Mystique stared after him. Not human. After a few moments in thought, she shook her head. No. Not possible. Oh God, I ate too much. Rogue sighed as she slumped back in her seat, the bowl in front of her empty except for a couple of crumbs and a few streaks of special sauce. I don't think I'll be able to move for at least an hour. I agree. Kurt said from across the table. Fraulein Martha, you are a goddess of cooking. I second the elf's motion. Everyone promptly stared in near shock at Logan, who simply shrugged. What? Then I third it. Kitty giggled. And if I have another bite, I'll explode. Fourth. And while it's not a bad way to go, the downside is that it means no food the next day. Jean joked, causing a brief round of chuckles. Well, before we finish, may I say a few things? Xavier said from the head of the table. First, Martha. Once again, you have provided a meal that even the gods would be envious of. Scott and Clark started to clap and all the others quickly joined in, causing Martha to blush. Secondly, Xavier continued, once the applause had abated, I would like to welcome Rogue to our number. Rogue, if there is a way to help you get your power under control, we will find it. I promise. In the meantime, I'm still available for hugging purposes. Clark grinned at her. Rogue smiled and leaned against him, letting him wrap his arm around her as she enjoyed the little bit of true contact she could still get. Third, a bit of news that I am afraid will dampen the mood, but which Clark insisted that you all know. Xavier said, glancing at Clark, who nodded. As you know, Mystique and Sabretooth tried to trick Rogue into joining their ranks, so that they could try and use her powers against Clark. Wouldn't work. Rogue muttered as Clark reached across and gently brushed a loose lock of hair back to behind her ear. That much is obvious. So they are unlikely to be after you any longer. However, we now have proof that they will be in a position to watch you, since Mystique is Principal Darkholme. Kitty, Kurt, Scott, and Jean all jolted in their seats as Xavier made the revelation. Clark is certain that she knows that he knows, and thus that you know, so it is very unlikely that she will take any action against you for. Sorry, 5. However, she will be reporting to Magneto, and Clark is currently the only one of us who can consistently see through her disguise. Therefore, I must stress that under no circumstances are you to discuss anyone's skills or powers while at the school. But Mystique is. Kitty started before Clark cut her off. I intend to have a long discussion with her tomorrow, but from what I can tell, she acts as the spy of Magneto's group. While she can fight if she needs to, she prefers to remain in the shadows, and she seems to be afraid of me. She knows that if she lets anything happen to any of you, there'll be nowhere on Earth she can hide. Clark's voice rang with iron resolve and determination, and Rogue nestled against him again. And thas why I see Clark as my big brother, she said. He's a Superman indeed. Big brother. Clark mused. Anna Rogue Kent. I'll think about it. Rogue opened her mouth, then froze. Clark looked down at her as she turned to Martha, who smiled at her. Imagine having a daughter at my age. Rogue stared at her, then her eyes filled with tears and she grabbed Clark, hugging him immediately. Carefully avoiding skin contact, Martha rested her hand reassuringly on the crying girl's shoulder. I heard your story. If you want Clark as a brother, then I'll be happy to welcome you to the family. Sabretooth stood in front of the metal desk, fighting off the feeling that he was an errant schoolboy standing before the headmaster, as Magneto leafed through the report that he and Mystique had compiled. After a few minutes, he looked up. So Mystique still has no idea about how this Superman found out who she was. No. She's still freaked out about it. Magneto nodded and pulled across a larger file. Victor saw the name printed on it. Clark Kent. So, we now know that he can fly, is very tough, strong, and immune to the draining power of Rogue. Magneto summarized. In addition, we cannot apply leverage because his only family, his mother, a Martha Kent, is currently living at Xavier's mansion as a cook. Apparently she makes a very good chocolate cake. Sabretooth offered. Magneto stared at him. What? That was the reason that Logan abandoned the fight and let Superman take me down instead. Sabretooth explained. Chocolate cake with a pouring sauce. Magneto's disbelieving stare didn't abate in the slightest. Seriously? He dropped me in Alaska, then went back to Xavier's so he wouldn't miss out. Magneto hadn't moved. Is something wrong? Hello. Just as Sabretooth was about to wave his hand in front of Magneto's face in the hopes of getting a reaction, Magneto finally blinked, then shook his head. You are telling me that a chocolate cake with pouring sauce, Sabretooth interjected. With pouring sauce, Magneto continued, was the reason you ended up in Alaska. Sabretooth shuffled his feet. Sounds pretty silly put like that. Magneto sank his head into his hands. And yet, somehow, I just know it's true. He sighed. All right. Anything else? Yeah, he smells odd. Magneto glared at him. Define. Odd. I dunno. Never smelled anyone quite like him. He smelled like. I dunno. Different. Magneto returned his head to his hands. Just go. Sabretooth went. Check the description for the links to the author.